Welcome to The Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Laura Staples. Laura is the Head of People and Performance at Laminex Australia, and I've invited Laura onto the podcast today to chat with me a bit about the future of work and the impact of remote working. So Laura, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
So there's a few topics that I wanted to cover with you, but most of them are off the back of something you said to me when we first met, which was you feel like at the moment we're going through the biggest work from home experience or experiment we've ever held. Tell me about what working from home has meant for Laminex.
I guess work from anywhere is how we're terming it, is something that came at, was quite a big shock to the business because Laminex has always been quite a traditional organisation where we had groups of employees based in offices, manufacturing plants and distribution centres all around Australia. And then suddenly overnight, I guess the world transitioned into the largest work from home experiment. And Laminex took the bold decision to say to employees, anyone who can work from home, pick up your computer screen, your keyboard, anything that you need, and we'll see you online the next day. And we didn't really do a lot of experimenting to begin with in terms of technology and making sure our systems held up. But one of the things that we did find straight away was that everyone wanted the opportunity to play their part and, I guess, in light of COVID, really look at how can we flatten the curve. So the idea that everyone took home what they needed to set themselves up freely from home was a really big shock to the organisation, but one that I think that we've managed through really well, and that's a credit to, I guess, all of our employees. I think one of the things that I would call out and what's been really fascinating to observe is what we're sort of seeing now and describing as this tale of two emerging cultures. So we've got a large group of employees who are in roles that enable them to work from home. And then we've got a group of employees that through the nature of their work, they're unable to work at home. And so a lot of the conversations that we're having now is, well, how do we manage these two groups of employees that we've now got at Laminex?
Have you found that managing the employee community is one thing, but then bringing new employees into that community, what's that experience been like? Because hiring remotely has been done by many businesses globally for a long time, but most organisations are finding it to be quite new. So how have you what have you learnt about virtual recruitment and onboarding, given that you've got these two cultures and so you're almost hiring for two different styles of working?
Yeah, that's certainly been interesting and a space that we've had to rethink a lot. We made a call on the 8th of May, so only 2 months after we'd sent all of our employees home that could work from home, that we would actually make this change permanent and that we would transition our support staff and a lot of our national roles into this work from anywhere concept moving forward, and we wouldn't actually return to an office. So with that decision, we've actually had to redesign a lot of the people processes that exist, including how we recruit for new talent and also how we onboard those employees. And I think what we're finding is because the major part of a recruitment process and looking at the available candidates there are is that cultural fit or that alignment with company purpose and to see how they would fit within a team. And those sort of skills and behaviours and the things that we look out for when we're meeting with candidates, you can't really get the same sense when you're not meeting face to face. So we've found ourselves in a position where we're designing, recruitment experiences where the candidate can put themselves in a real life scenario that may occur within the business so that we can test how they would respond or react. And I think we're starting to get some good traction there with providing or tweaking that recruitment candidate experience and putting it into the virtual setting now. I think the onboarding piece is probably trickier and something that I think is really important for organisations to consider is this notion of how do you get them to experience the culture of the business, having never met someone face to face. If they've gone through a virtual recruitment process and now they're starting with their laptop and their equipment that's been sent out to their home, how do you actually get them to feel immersed in the culture from day one, which we know from all the data available that cultural immersion is so important in that first 90 days of onboarding. So this is where we're starting to look at personalised videos, welcoming people to the team. For Laminex, because we do obviously have a tactile product, and we have the very famous Laminex chips, colour chips that we offer, starting to give them out as part of the onboarding package so that people do actually get to feel that sense of what this brand is about and hopefully start feeling a little bit more a part of the team right from the start.
I love that idea of something quite tangible for people to get their hands on, to understand the brand and feel part of the brand. And I guess it connects them more viscerally to the organisation than if they were just doing it through a video or through the VCs that they have with people to start their rapport and that sort of trust process. To receive something in the post where they get, a real piece of Laminex product. I think that's a really interesting approach to making them feel part of the business.
Yeah, and that's sort of something that, I've spoken to my team a lot about is how do we make that symbolic shift? So if you finish your role with your previous organisation on the Friday and you start with Laminex on Monday, how do we make that symbolic? This day is different. I'm now a part of a different team. I'm now a part of a different organisation, so that they feel connected to the business, which you can't. It's very hard to do that when you don't have that physical contact, you don't have that physical office to go to, which helps with that symbolic shift of mindset of being a part of a different organisation. So we're experimenting at the moment with what onboarding could look like. The more people that we have join the business in this virtual world that we find ourselves in, and some of the things that we're playing with is having tactile pieces of the product, making sure that they get a personalised video from their team members, just welcoming them on board and really getting that visual connection that they definitely need in order to feel a part of the company.
And then once they're on board and they're part of the organisation, how has communication had to change? Because when you want to do a town hall, everybody kind of piles into one room usually, or, maybe a couple of locations, and it's physical and you can see your leaders, and, it's a much different way of communicating. What have you seen now in terms of communicating en masse to organisations that are now scattered all over Melbourne or even Australia, but you're not together, you're all remote? What's been the comms shift for you guys?
This is probably my favourite space to play in at the moment, because I think we're realising more and more as a leadership group, and then also a people and performance team, that comms is the glue that holds this all together. It's the way that we get to continue our message, get our employees on board with whatever the strategy is of the organisation. And, an example that I can give, one thing that's very important to us is making sure that all employees are aligned to our company strategy, but also fundamentally understand the role that they have to play in delivering on strategy. And so at the beginning of this financial year, we created an online strategy festival where for 2 weeks, our intention was to showcase strategy in action, and we had 33 presentations from across the business, people that were demonstrating some of the initiatives and activities that they did at a local level, and we broadcast that out to over 200 employees via Zoom. So we tapped into the technology that we had available to us, and we coached as many people as possible to create engaging presentations. But the feedback that we got from that experience was that despite being remote and despite living in this virtual world at the moment, our people felt more connected than ever, because they got this sense of cross-functional responsibility, that all the initiatives and activities that are happening across the business, they really felt a part of. And I think that from that experience, we've now looked at what's the regular comms channel that we can use that still maintains that cultural connection and that connection to strategy, and that transparency of performance, that's going to be so important whilst managing this virtual world and this remote group of employees that we now have. And I think it's something that we probably took for granted in the face-to-face office environment, the ease that being able to communicate and the water cooler convos or the hallway conversations that people would have in bringing cross-functional teams together, and that idea of informal collaboration that occurred. And that's something that we're certainly putting a lot more effort in now with trying to bring those experiences online, but not recreating what we had of the past. It's really taking an opportunity to reshape what we're trying to achieve and rethink what communication should look like moving forward.
I think the other part of that too is the fact that you're willing to communicate that you do have a strategy and you've got direction at a time where a lot of organisations are treading water because, they may not know the future of the organisation given the state of the world at the moment. That uplift for people to feel that, okay, we've got strategic direction and we're moving forward and we're coming together as a business to talk about where do we want to be in 2, 3 or 5 years' time, that could be motivating for staff in an organisation where they've got so much change, at least, the flag's in the ground and everybody knows where you're all headed.
And I think that's where that comes down to connection. So the more we communicate, the greater people feel connected within the business, despite not being physically connected at the moment. So one thing that we do know and that we've seen really good success from is the more people throughout the organisation, the deeper the layers we get, the more they know about strategy and what the organisation is trying to achieve together, the more engaged they are and motivated to be a part of that.
So in the security industry, and for the listeners, it's a real area of focus. One of the things we talk a lot about is retention, and some of the things you've just talked about are key to retention, things like great onboarding, regular communication through channels that people want to consume information through. But one of the things that I wanted to chat with you about was reward and recognition, because this plays a big part in retention. And when you're remote, reward and recognition or the measure of reward and recognition is quite difficult to do. I guess it's the little things that staff would normally be visually seen to be doing and recognised for when they're in the office. When you're remote, they're much more difficult to identify and certainly, I guess, be understood by leaders. So what's been your thinking around reward and recognition of staff who continue to go above and beyond while they're remote? But how do you sort of manage your reward and recognition program off the back of a workforce that's so dispersed?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something that I think a lot of my peers are discussing at the moment, because it does require different thinking now being in this virtual employee experience. And I think the place that I would start with is we're doing a lot of experimenting at the moment, and what we're recognising is you need to understand the values and drivers of motivation for your employees before you can determine what the right reward and recognition program is going to be in this virtual world. And I think that this is where some of the tools that we use are part of mapping employee experience and looking at the touch points over the life cycle of an employee. That's where you get the opportunity to reshape some of this. We're looking at, and particularly now that we've got these sort of two groups of employees, ones that are still on site and involved in our operational parts of the business and the ones that are working remotely, we're looking at greater sort of flexibility, for example, for those who are on site that may not be in a role that traditionally you can do that. So that's a great way of being able to motivate and reward and recognise their effort and the role that they play within the organisation. And then I think it's in the remote group of employees, it's saying, well, how do we use the communication channels that we have available to us now, where recognition may have been a little bit more informal through hallway conversations or just recognising, someone's contribution to a particular project or an activity. It's now looking at, well, what can we do to make it more open and call it out in forums where recognition is well deserved. So, as part of that strategy festival that I spoke about earlier, we had a specific recognition session where we called out, aligned to our strategic pillars, great examples of people who have gone above and beyond and really exceeded our expectations. But I think that there is a huge part in the manager's role here in recognising the effort of their team, and some of the things that we've been encouraging our managers when they have their, if they've defaulted to a stand-up format with their team now that they're all remote. I know with my team, I have a catch-up on Monday, Wednesday and Friday afternoon. On Monday, we set our intent for the week. On Wednesday, we check in with each other and make sure that we're going okay. And then on Friday, it's all about reflection. And that's where I take the opportunity to recognise everyone's contribution for the week and just how hard everyone is working, giving these, really interesting and uncertain times.
I really love the idea of bookending the week that you just explained, in terms of setting your intention at the start of the week and then reflecting at the end of the week, because I know some of the feedback I've had from people is that now that everybody's remote, it feels like you're always at work. And, to have that bookending to say, this is Monday and this is Friday, and after your reflection you can go off and have your weekend, hopefully in some way that shapes the week for people so they can then kind of tools down and walk away knowing that come Monday, it'll be a fresh week and you'll be ready to set a new intention. And I think that's something everybody can learn from in terms of, giving staff that kind of exit strategy from their workplace at the end of the week and not let work bleed into the weekend.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And another kind of initiative that we've been playing with is the idea of having a lamp on your desk. So if you're in a position where you've got your office set up at home, having a light which you can physically turn on in the morning and turn off in the evening is a great way to switch from work to home. I think that we do need to be more deliberate in that transition because, that's a lot of the feedback that we're receiving at the moment is that employees don't know how to switch off. So the best way that we could, recommend, or, the quickest idea that we came up with, well, what's the physical thing that you can switch off at the end of the day, which is the symbolic shift from I've left the office now and now I'm at home.
And that trigger for people, that even if they're in the same space where their workplace is and their family is, that turning off that light trigger is incredibly important to sort of end the workday and, close the laptop, turn off the light and move away from that space.
Yeah, and such a simple idea that can actually be really effective for our mental well-being.
Laura, I've really enjoyed talking with you today, and I'd love to invite you back on the podcast at a later date when some of your experiments have had a bit more time to brew and you've got some great feedback from your employee community, especially around the reward and recognition piece, because I think it's an area that will only evolve as we kind of move into this whole new way of working across organisations. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the tips that you've given today and your reflection.
Thanks, Claire. It's been a pleasure to chat.
Thanks so much for joining me for today's episode. Feel free to listen to some of the previous guests on your favourite podcast app. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework, grab free chapters of my book, and sign up for my newsletter. If you love the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.